Right now, beneath the city of Los Angeles, beneath the freeways and the rail lines and the water pipelines that keep 20 million people alive, something is building. And for the first time, scientists have measured exactly how much. On June 3, 2026, a team of researchers led by geophysicist Lilian Burkhardt at the University of Bern and the University of Hawaii at Manoa published a study in the Journal of Geophysical Research Solid Earth that reconstructed 1,000 years of earthquake stress along the southern San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems. Their findings sent a ripple through the seismological community worldwide. The tectonic stress on key fault segments near the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area has now reached, and in some places exceeded, the highest levels recorded in the past 1,000 years. That is not a headline, that is a measurement. The San Jacinto Bernardino segment, one of the 3 fault sections converging at a critical junction called Cajon Pass, registered 3.6 megapascals of accumulated Coulomb stress, a reading that exceeds its previous peak from nearly 50 years ago. And the researchers found something else, something that could determine whether the next major earthquake stays on one fault or jumps to both. They found what they are calling an earthquake gate. Today we are going to break down exactly what scientists discovered beneath Southern California, what the earthquake gate at Cajon Pass actually means, and whether the conditions now building along 2 of America's most dangerous faults could produce the largest earthquake to hit Los Angeles in over a century. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Do you live anywhere near the San Andreas or San Jacinto faults? Tell me where you are and whether you have ever felt a significant earthquake. If you want to be the first to know every time something major happens, subscribe. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one, so the algorithm actually shows it to people who need to see it. Now let us get into it. The San Andreas Fault is the most famous geological structure in the United States. It runs approximately 1,210 kilometers from Cape Mendocino in the north to the Salton Sea in the south. It is a transform boundary, the dividing line where the Pacific Plate slides northwest past the North American Plate at a rate of roughly 46 millimeters per year. That is about the speed your fingernails grow. It sounds slow. It is not slow. That rate of movement translates into enormous quantities of strain energy accumulating in the locked sections of the fault every single day. And when that energy is released, it produces some of the most destructive earthquakes on the planet. The southern section of the San Andreas Fault has not produced a major earthquake since January 9, 1857. That event, known as the Fort Tejon earthquake, had an estimated magnitude of 7.9. The fault ruptured along the surface for approximately 350 kilometers from Parkfield in the north to Wrightwood near Cajon Pass in the south. The ground was offset by up to 9 meters in the Carrizo Plain. The shaking lasted between 1 and 3 minutes and was felt across more than 350,000 square kilometers of central and southern California. Eyewitness reports described wide fissures tearing open in the earth, rivers changing course, trees being swallowed by liquefaction, and solid ground rolling like waves in the ocean. In Los Angeles, residents staggered into the streets and fell to their knees. The Fort Tejon earthquake remains the last big one to strike the southern section of the San Andreas Fault. That was 169 years ago. And in those 169 years, the fault has not been idle. It has been locked. The Pacific Plate has continued grinding northwest at 46 millimeters per year. The North American Plate has continued holding its ground. And in between, where the 2 plates meet along the San Andreas, the friction that holds the fault surfaces together has been absorbing every millimeter of that motion as elastic strain energy stored in the rock. The rock on both sides of the fault is slowly deforming, bending, flexing, loading like a spring that has been compressed for nearly 2 centuries. That spring has not released. The energy has nowhere to go except into the fault. To put this in physical terms, the San Andreas Fault system is not a single clean fracture in the earth. It is a zone of deformation that can be several kilometers wide in places, a complex network of fractures, branches, and subsidiary faults that together accommodate the plate boundary motion. Along the southern section, the fault is locked from the surface down to a depth of roughly 15 to 20 kilometers. Below that depth, the rock is hot enough and ductile enough to deform slowly without generating earthquakes. But in the brittle upper crust, the locked zone is storing energy. Every year, 46 millimeters of displacement is being added to the strain budget. Every year, the fault moves imperceptibly closer to the breaking point. The San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems together have produced 36 earthquakes of magnitude 6.4 or above in the past 1,000 years. That averages to roughly 1 major earthquake every 28 years. The last major earthquake on the southern San Andreas was in 1857. The last on the San Jacinto near San Bernardino was in 1890. Both faults have been in a period of relative quiet that is anomalous by any historical standard. The average recurrence interval for a magnitude 7 or above event on the southern San Andreas based on paleoseismic trenching studies is roughly 100 to 150 years. We are at 169 years and counting. But here's the part that most people do not realize. The San Andreas is not the only major fault threatening Los Angeles. Running roughly parallel to it, about 30 to 40 kilometers to the southwest, is the San Jacinto Fault. The San Jacinto is one of the most seismically active fault systems in Southern California. It has produced more moderate earthquakes in the modern instrumental era than the San Andreas itself. And at one critical point in the landscape, these two massive fault systems converge. That point is Cajon Pass. Cajon Pass sits approximately 80 kilometers northeast of downtown Los Angeles. It is where Interstate 15, the main highway connecting Los Angeles to Las Vegas, cuts through the San Gabriel Mountains. Major railway lines run through it. Natural gas pipelines cross it. Electrical transmission corridors pass through it. Water infrastructure passes through it. It is one of the most critical transportation and energy choke points in the entire western United States. And it sits directly on top of the junction where the San Andreas and San Jacinto faults meet. If Cajon Pass were to be damaged or closed by a major earthquake, the consequences would cascade immediately. Interstate 15 carries over 100,000 vehicles per day through the pass. The BNSF Railway moves an enormous volume of freight through the corridor connecting the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach to the rest of the nation. The natural gas pipelines feeding the Los Angeles basin pass through or near the junction. Electrical transmission lines carrying power from desert solar and wind installations cross the area. A simultaneous rupture on both fault systems at this location would not just shake buildings, it would sever the infrastructure arteries that keep one of the largest metropolitan areas in the Western Hemisphere functioning. The Southern California Association of Governments has estimated that the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area has a population of roughly 20 million people. That is more than the population of all but 4 entire states. And every one of those people depends on infrastructure that crosses or runs parallel to the San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems. To understand what the earthquake gate means, you need to understand how these two fault systems interact. The Burkhardt study reconstructed 1,000 years of seismic history along both faults using geological evidence, radiocarbon dating, tree ring records, and historical observations of ground ruptures. They then built a physics-based 4-dimensional computer model that simulates how stress builds up on each fault segment, how each earthquake redistributes stress to neighboring segments, and how the deeper layers of the crust slowly relax after a large rupture. The model tracked stress accumulation across the entire earthquake cycle, not just a snapshot of today's conditions. What they found was remarkable. Cajon Pass does not simply block or channel earthquakes. It responds to stress conditions, and those conditions change over centuries. When the stress levels on the San Andreas side and the San Jacinto side of the pass are similar and both are high, the gate opens. A rupture on one fault can propagate through the junction and continue along the other fault, creating a single massive event that involves both systems simultaneously. When the stress levels on the two sides are significantly different, the gate closes. A rupture hits the junction and stops. The earthquake stays on one fault. The study examined the historical record and identified specific past events that matched each scenario. The 1812 Wrightwood earthquake, estimated at magnitude 7.5, appears to have been a gate-open event. The rupture propagated through Cajon Pass and involved both the San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems. It caused 40 deaths. The 1857 Fort Tectonic earthquake, by contrast, appears to have been a gate-closed event. The rupture traveled 350 kilometers along the San Andreas but stopped at Cajon Pass. Thomas Jordan, the director of the Southern California Earthquake Center, has noted that the slip likely stopped there because tectonic stress in that section had been released decades earlier during the 1812 event. And here is the finding that his seismologists paying very close attention right now. The stress levels on both sides of Cajon Pass are converging. The San Andreas segments and the San Jacinto segments near the junction are all accumulating high Coulomb stress simultaneously. According to the model, this convergence of high stress is the exact configuration that preceded the gate-open events in the historical record. In the researchers' words, that is the configuration we are approaching today. To put 3.6 megapascals in context, Coulomb stress is a measure of how close a fault segment is to failure. It accounts for both the shear stress trying to make the fault slip and the normal stress clamping the fault surfaces together. When Coulomb stress increases on a fault, the fault moves closer to the point where friction can no longer hold it in place. 3.6 megapascals on the San Jacinto Bernardino segment is the highest value anywhere in the team's 1,000-year reconstruction. That does not mean an earthquake is imminent. It means the loading is at a level that has historically preceded major ruptures. The last major earthquake on the San Jacinto Fault near San Bernardino occurred in 1890, a magnitude 6.7 event that caused significant damage. The last major earthquake on the southern San Andreas occurred in 1857. The extreme southernmost portion of the fault near Bombay Beach at the Salton Sea has not ruptured since 1680. That is 346 years of accumulated stress on a segment that paleoseismic studies show typically ruptures every 150 to 200 years. The USGS Uniform California Earthquake Rupture Forecast estimates a 93% probability of a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake somewhere in Southern California within the next 30 years. For the Los Angeles region specifically, the probability is roughly 60%. Those numbers are not predictions. They are statistical projections based on the known behavior of the fault systems over hundreds and thousands of years, but they tell you something critical. The question is not whether Southern California will experience another major earthquake. The question is whether it will be a single fault event or a multi-fault event that crosses the earthquake gate. The difference matters enormously. A single fault rupture on the southern San Andreas, the scenario modeled by the USGS shakeout study, would produce approximately magnitude 7.8 shaking across a massive area of Southern California. The shakeout model estimates that such an event would cause over 1,800 deaths, 53,000 injuries requiring emergency room care, approximately 1,600 fires ignited from ruptured gas lines, the destruction of 200 million square feet of building space, equivalent to 133,000 single-family homes, and total economic losses approaching $200 billion. The shaking would last between 30 seconds and over 2 minutes depending on distance from the fault. A joint rupture crossing Cajon Pass and involving both the San Andreas and San Jacinto faults simultaneously could produce a magnitude 7.4 to 7.8 event that affects a far larger geographic area than a single fault scenario. The rupture would propagate along two fault systems simultaneously, shaking communities on both sides of the San Gabriel Mountains. Critical infrastructure passing through Cajon Pass, the interstate highway, the railways, the pipelines, the power lines, would face simultaneous ground displacement from faulting on both systems. This is the scenario that the earthquake gate research directly addresses. And the Burkhardt study is not operating in isolation. It builds on decades of increasingly alarming research into the southern San Andreas system. In 2019, a team at the University of Iowa and the USGS found that the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake sequence, which included a magnitude 7.1 event in the Mojave Desert, had transferred stress onto the Garlock Fault. The Garlock Fault runs east to west for approximately 300 kilometers, connecting the Ridgecrest fault zone directly to the San Andreas. Researchers warned that if the Garlock ruptured in a large event, it would likely trigger a San Andreas earthquake north of Los Angeles. That study added a third fault system to the cascade concern. The 2019 Ridgecrest sequence also produced a seismic creep, slow silent movement, along a 20 to 26 kilometer section of the Garlock Fault. This creep was detected through satellite measurements and was described as unprecedented. Faults that are creeping are releasing some stress gradually, but faults that creep on some segments while remaining locked on others can actually concentrate stress at the transition points, making the locked segments even more dangerous. And then there is the extreme southern end of the San Andreas, near Bombay Beach at the Salton Sea. This section has not produced a major rupture since 1680, 346 years. Paleoseismic studies at sites along this stretch show that it typically ruptures every 150 to 200 years. By that measure, it is at least 146 years overdue. The Burkhardt study shows that this section is also accumulating high stress, and if it ruptured, the energy could propagate northwestward along the fault toward Cajon Pass and into the Los Angeles basin. This is what seismologists mean when they say the system is connected. The San Andreas, the San Jacinto, the Garlock, the Eastern California shear zone, these are not isolated faults. They are components of a single plate boundary system. Stress on one affects stress on all the others. An earthquake on one fault changes the loading on every neighboring fault. And right now, according to the accumulated research, multiple components of this system are running near their historical stress limits simultaneously. And the Burkhardt study is not operating in isolation. It builds on decades of increasingly alarming research into the southern San Andreas system. In 2019, a team at the University of Iowa and the USGS found that the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake sequence, which included a magnitude 7.1 event in the Mojave Desert, had transferred stress onto the Garlock Fault. The Garlock Fault runs east to west for approximately 300 kilometers, connecting the Ridgecrest fault zone directly to the San Andreas. Researchers warned that if the Garlock ruptured in a large event, it would likely trigger a San Andreas earthquake north of Los Angeles. That study added a third fault system to the cascade concern. The 2019 Ridgecrest sequence also produced a seismic creep, slow silent movement, along a 20 to 26 kilometer section of the Garlock Fault. This creep was detected through satellite measurements and was described as unprecedented. Faults that are creeping are releasing some stress gradually, but faults that creep on some segments while remaining locked on others can actually concentrate stress at the transition points, making the locked segments even more dangerous. And then there is the extreme southern end of the San Andreas near Bombay Beach at the Salton Sea. This section has not produced a major rupture since 1680, 346 years. Paleoseismic studies at sites along this stretch show that it typically ruptures every 150 to 200 years. By that measure, it is at least 146 years overdue. The Burkhardt study shows that this section is also accumulating high stress, and if it ruptured, the energy could propagate northwestward along the fault toward Cajon Pass and into the Los Angeles basin. This is what seismologists mean when they say the system is connected. The San Andreas, the San Jacinto, the Garlock, the Eastern California shear zone, these are not isolated faults. They are components of a single plate boundary system. Stress on one affects stress on all the others. An earthquake on one fault changes the loading on every neighboring fault. And right now, according to the accumulated research, multiple components of this system are running near their historical stress limits simultaneously. The San Andreas Fault crosses the California Aqueduct in multiple places. It runs parallel to Interstate 5 through Cajon Pass. It intersects or closely parallels nearly every major power transmission corridor between Los Angeles and the Central Valley. Natural gas pipelines, water mains, fiber optic trunks, and rail lines all cross the fault. The shakeout scenario projects that a single major rupture would ignite approximately 1,600 fires from ruptured utilities alone. In a dual fault event through Cajon Pass, the infrastructure exposure multiplies. Consider just the water supply. The California Aqueduct, which delivers water from Northern California to the parched Los Angeles basin, crosses the San Andreas Fault. The Los Angeles Aqueduct, which brings water from the Owens Valley, crosses it twice. A magnitude 7.8 rupture would physically offset these crossing points by several meters, instantly severing the water supply to millions of people. Engineers have estimated that restoring full water service after a major San Andreas event could take weeks to months. Los Angeles does not have weeks of stored water. The city's emergency reserves would begin to run critically low within days. Now add fire. In the Northridge earthquake of 1994, which was a magnitude 6.7 event on a blind thrust fault that did not even break the surface, approximately 60 fires were ignited. The shakeout scenario for a 7.8 models approximately 1,600 fires. In the dry Santa Ana wind conditions that frequently affect Southern California, fire becomes the secondary catastrophe that can exceed the earthquake itself in destructive power. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake killed roughly 3,000 people. Most of them died not from the shaking, but from the fires that burned for 3 days afterward when ruptured water mains left the fire department unable to fight the blazes. The parallels are not lost on emergency planners. The key difference is scale. In 1906, San Francisco had a population of roughly 400,000. Today, the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area has 20 million. The infrastructure is more complex, the interdependencies are deeper, and the fault system that threatens it is now, according to the June 2026 study, more stressed than it has been at any point in the past millennium. But here is the thing that separates California from the states we have covered in previous videos. California knows. Californians are not living in ignorance of their seismic risk. The state has spent decades building earthquake preparedness into its infrastructure, its building codes, its emergency response systems, and its public culture. California has the Shake Alert early warning system, which can provide seconds to tens of seconds of advance notice before shaking arrives. California has seismic retrofit programs for bridges, overpasses, and older buildings. California has stricter building codes than almost any other state in the nation. Earthquake drills are routine. Earthquake insurance is widely available. The Shake Alert system, operated by the USGS in partnership with university seismology labs across the West Coast, Wrightwood, is designed to detect the initial compressional waves from an earthquake and push alerts to cell phones and emergency systems before the more destructive shear waves and surface waves arrive. Depending on distance from the epicenter, this can provide anywhere from a few seconds to over a minute of warning. In the Northridge earthquake, even 10 seconds of warning would have saved lives by allowing people to drop, cover, and hold on before the shaking intensified. The system has been tested in dozens of moderate earthquakes since its rollout and has performed reliably. But Shake Alert has a fundamental limitation. It cannot predict earthquakes. It can only detect them milliseconds after they begin and race the alert ahead of the shaking. For a fault rupture originating on the extreme southern section of the San Andreas near the Salton Sea and propagating northwest through Cajon Pass toward Los Angeles, the travel time of the seismic waves would provide roughly 60 to 90 seconds of warning for communities in the Los Angeles basin. That is time to duck under a desk, move away from a window, stop a surgical procedure, or halt a train. It is not time to evacuate. It is not time to reinforce a building. It is not time to shut down a nuclear reactor. And yet, the systems built to protect Southern California have never been tested by a magnitude 7.8 or larger event in the modern era. The Northridge earthquake of 1994, magnitude 6.7, killed 57 people, injured over 8,700, caused $20 billion in damage, and temporarily shut down major highway interchanges across the Los Angeles basin. And that was a 6.7. A dual fault rupture through Cajon Pass could release even more. The Burckhardt study does not predict when the next major earthquake will strike. No study can. Earthquake prediction, in the sense of specifying the exact time, location, and magnitude of a future event, remains beyond the current capability of science. What the study does is quantify the stress state. It measures how much energy has accumulated, how that energy compares to historical levels, and under what conditions the earthquake gate at Cajon Pass has opened in the past. The conclusion is clear. The system is critically stressed. The conditions that have preceded gate-open events are building. And 169 years of silence on the southern San Andreas does not mean the fault has stopped. It means the clock is still running. The San Andreas Fault moves at a rate of roughly 46 millimeters per year, over 169 years. That translates to approximately 7.8 meters of accumulated displacement that has not yet been released as an earthquake. That is over 25 feet of stored energy. To put that in context, the average slip during the 1857 Fort Tejon earthquake was 4.5 meters. The current accumulated displacement exceeds the average displacement of the last big one. Seismologist Susan Huff of the USGS has noted that very few Californians alive today have experienced one of these great earthquakes. The Northridge earthquake of 1994 was a 6.7. The Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989, which collapsed the Cypress Street Viaduct in Oakland and interrupted the World Series, was a 6.9. Both were devastating. Both are widely remembered. And both are roughly 30 to 45 times weaker than the magnitude 7.8 to 8.0 event that the San Andreas is capable of producing. The difference between a 6.7 and a 7.8 is not incremental, it is logarithmic. Every full magnitude step represents approximately 32 times more energy released. A 7.8 release is roughly 45 times the energy of a 6.7. The shaking lasts longer, the affected area is larger, the infrastructure damage is exponentially worse. People who live through Northridge think they know what a strong earthquake feels like. They do not. They know what a moderate earthquake feels like. They do not. They know what a moderate earthquake feels like. The Fort Tejon earthquake of 1857, or a future event of comparable magnitude, would produce shaking that most Californians alive today have never experienced, have never trained for, and have never imagined in concrete physical terms. Ground displacement of several meters, shaking that lasts over a minute, liquefaction across the alluvial basins, landslides across the San Gabriel and San Bernardino mountains, the simultaneous failure of water, gas, electrical, and communications infrastructure across an area of 10,000 square kilometers. Seismologist Susan Huff of the USGS has noted that very few Californians alive today have experienced one of these great earthquakes. The Northridge earthquake of 1994 was a 6.7. The Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989, which collapsed the Cypress Street Viaduct in Oakland and interrupted the World Series, was a 6.9. Both were devastating. Both are widely remembered, and both are roughly 30 to 45 times weaker than the magnitude 7.8 to 8.0 event that the San Andreas is capable of producing. The difference between a 6.7 and a 7.8 is not incremental. It is logarithmic. Every full magnitude step represents approximately 32 times more energy released. A 7.8 release is roughly 45 times the energy of a 6.7. The shaking lasts longer. The affected area is larger. The infrastructure damage is exponentially worse. People who live through Northridge think they know what a strong earthquake feels like. They do not. They know what a moderate earthquake feels like. The Fort Tejon earthquake of 1857, or a future event of comparable magnitude, would produce shaking that most Californians alive today have never experienced, have never trained for, and have never imagined in concrete physical terms. Ground displacement of several meters, shaking that lasts over a minute, liquefaction across the alluvial basins, landslides across the San Gabriel and San Bernardino mountains, the simultaneous failure of water, gas, electrical, and communications infrastructure across an area of 10,000 square kilometers. The most realistic danger for the 20 million people living in the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area is not some theoretical worst-case scenario dreamed up by disaster movies. It is a scientifically measured, peer-reviewed, data-driven observation that the fault systems surrounding their city are more stressed than they have been at any point in the last 1,000 years, and that the junction connecting those systems is approaching the conditions that have historically allowed ruptures to propagate across both faults simultaneously. This does not mean an earthquake is coming tomorrow. It does not mean an earthquake is coming this year. It means the physics says the system is loaded, the gate is approaching open, and when it releases, the shaking will last minutes, not seconds. The damage will be measured in hundreds of billions, not millions, and the lives affected will number in the tens of millions. If this was useful, hit the like button. We are still pushing for 5,000 on this one, so the algorithm shows this to people who actually need to hear it. And if you live anywhere near the San Andreas or San Jacinto faults, drop a comment and tell me, are you prepared? Do you have a plan? I read every single one. See you in the next one.